So, and action. Welcome to part 3, class 3 of Nothing to be Afraid of, a study of the book of Revelation. We started last week, started and finished chapter 1, where we have John on the Isle of Patmos on Sunday, and he hears the voice behind him saying, write these things that are and that are soon to be. He turns around, sees the risen Lord there in the middle of the 7 lampstands, holding the 7 stars in his right hand. And again, that beautiful imagery of it's that hand holding the 7 stars that when John falls down as though dead, he says, that it was the right hand of the Lord that reached down and touched him. The same hand that holds the stars is the same hand that touches us. Great imagery. Okay, so now starting in chapter 2, we begin the next 2 chapters of the letter to the 7 churches of Asia. Let's just start by reading it. Chapter 2, verse 1. To the angel of the church in Ephesus write, these are the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance. I know that you cannot tolerate evildoers. You have tested those who claim to be apostles but are not, and have found them to be false. I also know that you are enduring patiently and bearing up for the sake of my name, and that you have not grown weary. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. Remember then from what you have fallen. Repent and do the works you did at first. If not, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place unless you repent. Yet this is to your credit. You hate the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. To everyone who conquers, I will give permission to eat from the tree of life that is in the paradise of God. I'll tell you what, we'll pause there and talk about Ephesus. Then we'll come back and read the next one to Smyrna and then Thyatira and then on from there. So chapters 2 and 3 are the letter to the 7 churches. We sometimes say these are letters, but don't forget, the whole book of Revelation is a letter. And these are simply the messages to those 7 churches that are in the province of Asia. Again, not the continent of Asia. When it says the 7 churches of Asia, it's talking about the Roman province that is the western 1/3 of what we today call Turkey. That was the Roman province of Asia. The form that these messages take is actually, all 7 messages are kind of in the form of an imperial decree. It's very striking, the form that John uses there, and it also has prophetic imagery from the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. There are 8 easily identifiable characteristics of each of the, or sections for each of these 7 messages. The first is pretty obvious. It's who's the addressee, who's it to the church in Ephesus. Okay, so all of them are going to have who those messages are written to. The second is the command to write. The third, when he says write, to the church in Ephesus, write this. Third then is the prophetic formula, which is in the words in the New Revised Standard Version that we use. These are the words of. I think in King James it says something like, thus saith the Lord, or something like that. The fourth is the title or titles of Christ that are used. Again, looking in the message to the church in Ephesus, these are the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the golden lampstands. All referencing Christ, of course, and referencing the vision from chapter 1 that John had seen. The fifth is the analysis of the church, describing what they are, what they've been through, and is preceded with the I know. I know your works. I know your love. I know your, all those things. And also is the sixth part. In the sixth part is the words of warning or encouragement that we find there. The seventh is the warning, the proclamation of warning and the requiring to hear. He says, those who have an ear, let them hear. And the eighth is the victory formula, which usually comes with a promise to those who overcome or whoever conquers. Those are the 8 hallmarks there. So in the letter, the message to Ephesus, Ephesus is the first church to get mentioned there. It's the principal city in the Roman province of Asia. It is one of the it is the 4th largest city in the Roman Empire. There's about 250,000 people there. Not huge by today's standards when you look at Mexico City with 31 million people and Tokyo with 33 million. Those numbers, of course, fluctuate every year. Every week, I imagine. But still, behind Rome, behind Alexandria, Egypt, and behind, I think, Antioch in Syria was the third one. Then there's Ephesus. So it's a cosmopolitan center, no doubt about it. The church, they're wealthy, and they got kind of a big city attitude, kind of a cosmopolitan attitude about themselves there. They're commended for their hard work, their patient endurance. Remember, that phrase, patient endurance, you're going to hear over and over again. That's something that the risen Lord says to John himself, noting his patient endurance. And it's something that will be said to the various churches, too, at various points. And John says that one of the things that they're noted for is their ability to discern between true apostles and false ones, true prophets and false prophets, and their rejection of the false teaching. And when in verse 2 we read the word apostles there, we shouldn't think of the 12. He's using the word apostles more or less as missionaries who had come in and out of that region for decades. So these apostles, those sent with a message, are various ones. Some have a true message, some have a misleading or false message. And John says, or the Lord says through John, congratulations, you can tell the difference. But there's still a problem. Again, in the King James Version, it says, you have left your first love. And that's kind of misleading. It sounds like maybe they don't love the Lord like they should. Well, can't have that. But really, the Greek is more like, you don't love like you used to. And that's the way the New Revised Standard Version renders it very admirably. You don't love like you used to. Well, what does that mean? We love the Lord, sure. It's easy to love the Lord when you don't see him. It's easy to love the one who's far away. It's easy to love the one who does so much for you. But what about those that you're with all the time? You don't love like you used to, he tells them. The love you had at first. They had started off so well, the church in Ephesus. But they began removing teachers and members who weren't quite believing exactly like they did. They were so spot on for identifying false teaching that instead of getting rid of the false teaching or overcoming the false teaching, they just got rid of them. It's like theological Survivor. We just simply vote them off the island, vote them out of the church. And that just doesn't, and John is telling them, the Lord is telling them, that's not what love does. Love comes to discussion. Love grapples. Love works through these things. To simply cut them off, that's not what you were ever supposed to do. The Lord is telling them the risen Christ is encouraging them to return to the ultimate way, the way of love. The Lord also warns them that his presence will just depart from them. I'll just take away the lampstand. I'll be gone from the midst of you, he says. Even well-intentioned people, when they have departed the way of love, looking to find the true path, dogmatically, theologically, doctrinally, insert any word you want there, the true path was always the path of love. Well, is John putting love over doctrine? He's saying that doctrine is best served by love, and that when our quest for doctrine causes us to abandon love, we have taken a wrong turn. That it's got to be love first. What good does it do to throw these people out then where, here's an example. A friend of mine, his name was David Shuck. Goodness, he probably died about 10 years ago, I guess. And he was, I think he was about 89 when he passed away. But one of the things that he told me that always stuck with me, he was kind of like a sort of a mentor figure to me. And he said, you know the worst thing that ever happened to the church in the 20th century? And I said, maybe when the Soviets took over the Russian Orthodox Church and made the priests all agents of the KGB? No. Maybe when the church abandoned the gospel and adopted the Aryan paragraphs in World War II, and the church became a Nazi church. Now, he said, man, what could be worse than that? I'm thinking. When the church didn't say anything, when the KKK burned the church in Alabama and the 4 little girls were trapped inside. No, he said, all of those were pretty awful. He says, do you remember in the late 60s, there was a group known as the Jesus People? And I'm like, yeah, I remember them. I kind of was one of them. And he said, you remember how they came into the church and the church said, unless you cut your hair, unless you wash that patchouli off of you, unless you get a job and get rid of your VW microbus and stop listening to Jimi Hendrix, and unless you do all those things, you can't be part of us. And they left. He said, those people, the Jesus people, sometimes called the Jesus freaks, I remember, they became the New Age movement. They still wanted to follow love. They still wanted to follow a way of understanding and compassion, but the church wouldn't have them. And I'm like, oh boy, yeah, that's right. And he goes, mind you, the KGB stuff and the Hitler stuff was all pretty bad. And he goes, but I guess I'm talking about in our lifetimes what we've seen and when the church would throw out people like that because you didn't do things just the way we thought they should be done. Kind of like what's happened in Ephesus. They weren't quite, were they false teachers? Well, yeah, John identifies them as being false. But goodness gracious, we've all been wrong at some point or other. And thank God there were those who said, not quite right. You might want to look at it this way. Love brings you back. Well, the Lord tells the church in Ephesus, if you don't come back to that, then I'll just leave you. How's that? You left these others or forced them away from you. I'll take my presence away from you. Frightening stuff. Now, to their credit, they had rejected the work of the teachings of the Nicolaitans. The Nicolaitans, okay, they're going to show up a couple of times. Who are these people? Well, they're a little bit shrouded in mystery, but according to early church writers like Irenaeus and Tertullian and some of the others, they were the followers of a man named Nicholas. Okay, that's easy to figure out. Who is this Nicholas? If you remember in the Acts of the Apostles, there were the 7 deacons that were appointed, and one of them was Nicholas. And according to Irenaeus, these people were the followers of that guy, a guy appointed by the apostles, and he winds up going off on a different path altogether. So these Nicolaitans now, what do they look like? Well, we'll spend a little bit more time on them in just a minute or two, but they were again, Irenaeus said that they were leading people to, what was the phrase? Unrestrained indulgence. We know that they let people eat the meat that was sacrificed to idols. That's a big thing that we'll repeat over and over again. There was sexual immorality. There was a kind of a adoption of worldly culture and worldly values, especially the values of where they were located in Ephesus, which was a cult center. And apparently the Nicolaitans are saying, well, if you really want to be part of this, society, you need to practice like them. Well, nope, that's not what we need to do. Need to love, yes. Need to spread the gospel, yes. Need to live the gospel, and so spread the gospel. All those things, but to become a part and take part as they were doing, nope, the Lord tells them that's all wrong. The Nicolaitans aren't the only ones who are going to be mentioned like that for their licentious behavior. And they're certainly not the only ones who were doing it there in the 7 churches, and they're not the only ones who've done it throughout church history either. We see that happening over and over again. In the Middle Ages, there was a guy named Fra Dolcino who started a group known as the Dulcinians, and they decided that all vows were invalid. So priests and monks and nuns and married couples, all those vows mean nothing. And now everybody, you can do anything you want to. Even the Pope kind of goes, no, can't let you do that. We've had some weird popes along the way, but even some of the worst of the popes went, can't let that happen. Well, then the Dolcinians start attacking bishops in their episcopal homes. They start attacking priests. So who is it? Edvard Grieg, I think, wrote a famous symphonic suite called The Night on Bald Mountain, which was actually about that event when the papal armies surrounded the Dulcinians on Bald Mountain and killed them to the last. Again, I think the risen Lord might have said to the church in Rome, you don't love like you used to. You shouldn't be killing the people that you disagree with. And later, Martin Luther would disagree with Huldrych Zwingli and say, you don't pick up the sword to defend the gospel. That's bad form there. Anyway, and we, again, see it played out all throughout history. So the Nicolaitans are in favor of compromising or assimilation within the Greco-Roman world. And when Christ says that he hates the works of the Nicolaitans, that's actually not an altogether correct phrase either. It should be read more like rejects. You don't see hate appear a whole lot in the mouth of the Lord. There's usually some other meaning there. And so when he says, I hate the work of the Nicolaitans, he means I reject it. I reject what they're teaching. I reject the way that they are persuading others. And then, of course, he says, let anyone who has an ear, let them hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. He's talking about spiritual perception. He's not talking about whether or not, Van Gogh would only be able to hear half the message. That if you have spiritual perception, then understand what it is that the Holy Spirit is saying to the church there. And then he says, and I love this, to everyone who conquers, I will give permission to eat of the tree of life that is in the paradise of God. And this is the first indication, the first image of the ultimate aim of restoration is a return to the Garden of Eden, a return to paradise. That's a theme that gets played over and over again throughout the book of Revelation. In fact, you get towards the very end, and what is it that the Lord says? But behold, I make all things new. Meaning, he doesn't say I make all new things. He says I make all things as they were in the beginning. I restore everything. I heal everything. Oh, those are just the best words of the scriptures. And so he's saying, for the one who overcomes, you'll get to eat the tree of the life. The tree of life that had been forbidden to Adam and Eve, of course, because of their downfall. Yep, you'll be able to eat from that tree in the Garden of Eden all over again. If you overcome your conflict with the world and with evil. So, in Smyrna then, he writes, or to Smyrna, and to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Beware, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have affliction. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let everyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death. Oh my goodness. Church of Smyrna is about, hey, where are you going? You're not allowed to leave? The church in Smyrna is about 35 or 40 miles kind of north of the city of Ephesus. Today, the city is called Izmir. Not that you need to know that, but if you ever find yourself in Izmir, Turkey, then you can go, hey, I'm in Smyrna. In John's time, the city of Smyrna's population was around 100,000 people. Again, fair-sized city, a large city for that time. Smyrna had built a temple way back, oh goodness, around the year 195 BC, I think. Built a temple to the goddess Roma. Okay, shouldn't be too hard to figure out who that is. The patron of Rome. Okay, so we have from the year 193 BC, we have this temple of Roma built, and then somewhere maybe in the year 45, I think, 35, 45, they built a temple to the Roman Emperor Tiberius. Tiberius was the second true emperor behind Augustus. And so they built, so now you've got a temple to the goddess Roma, you've got a temple to the emperor of Rome, to Tiberius himself. And so Smyrna becomes a seat of the Rome cult, so to speak. The worship of Rome, the worship of the emperor, was big business in the city of Smyrna. So the message to Smyrna is the shortest of all the 7 messages, and just like the message to the Philadelphians, it contains no condemnation. There's nothing but good news here. Just praise. That's all that is for them. But we also got a return to the metaphor that shows up in chapter 1 of Jesus being the first and the last. I'm the one who was dead and is now alive. In chapter 1 it says, and is now alive forever. So that first and last, Alpha and Omega, shows up a whole lot through the whole book of Revelation. And it's a constant reminder that before there was troubles, I was there. And I'll be there when the troubles are over. And I'll be there all throughout. I'm the one that they managed to kill, but I'm alive again. They might kill you, but you'll be alive again. I remember in chapter 1, I have the keys of death and the grave. He says, I know your afflictions and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan. Well, that's kind of a funny phrase. I don't mean just funny as in odd, and it is, but it's also kind of funny. He's saying, really? That's what they are? They're not really Jews. The synagogue they're part of is the synagogue of Satan. And it makes me think of the quote from Voltaire who said, God is a comedian playing to an audience afraid to laugh. I think sometimes we should read the humor into it, and he's going, no. And actually, we wind up reading it and making the Jews the villain, but John is actually using it in a very positive sense. They say they're Jews, but they're not. They don't act like Jews. They don't act like they're supposed to. They're not a part of the household of God. They're the synagogue of Satan is what they are. So many times we've taken phrases and made them, I don't mean us, but as a culture, have taken some of these phrases and made them anti-Jewish. We blame the Jews for the crucifixion of Jesus. Don't know how to break this to you, but crucifixion is not a Jewish execution. That's Roman. And a Jewish execution is stoning. That was their capital punishment, or strangling. But that was for specific crimes. So to use this in what can only be called anti-Semitic rhetoric is absolutely false. John is not meaning it that way at all. So apparently, now he says in there, let's back up. I know your wealth and I know your poverty, and these are used symbolically, sure, but sometimes in a very literal case too, describing the people in the church in Smyrna. They had suffered economic boycott because they didn't participate in the emperor cult or the worship of the goddess of Rome. They had been discriminated against physically and financially, but John says, or the Lord says to them through John, you are wealthy in spirit, and that's where it really counts. So now apparently there are these Jewish leaders who were accusing the Christians of being agitators. Agitators against the Roman authorities, because remember, you got the cult of the Caesars here and you got the cult of Rome right here in this city. So what better way to get at somebody than to go, these people don't even bow down to the emperor, which they did not. These people don't even sacrifice at the altar of Rome, which they did not. And so they made that the charge for Christian steadfastness. That'll happen again and again and again. It wasn't that it was the Jewish people, it was Jewish leaders, it was agitators themselves who happened to be Jews. And it's kind of hard for us to understand that with these harsh words about the Jews being put into the mouth of Christ, and yet there are some things to look at. There's a few literary, historical contexts that we have to keep in mind. Number one is the word Jew, like I said, in this instance is a positive characterization. It's good. They say they're Jews, but they're not. Meaning, Jews are nice people. These people aren't. These people are turning on us. These people are sicking the Romans on us. It's the hurtful, that's the hurtful thing about those who are attacking them. They do not, in fact, measure up to what it means to be Jewish. The second thing, never forget, John is Jewish. Jesus is Jewish. And the church in Smyrna are Jewish Christians for the most part. The church is identified in Jewish terms there. Third, this isn't an issue of race whatsoever. The statement isn't meant to be anti-Semitic in the racial sense, but it expresses a religious, even a civil conflict between the Christians who are there. And remember, the Christians are no longer worshiping on the same day. Remember, talked about in the second class that the Jews are still celebrating their services, their worship day on the Sabbath, Saturday. The Christians have now started on the first day of the week, Sunday. So you got this conflict between them now. Or this, I don't want to say conflict as much as discrepancy between them. Anyway, fourth, the phrases like synagogue of Satan was actually phrases like that were used a lot of times between the Jews themselves. That when the Jews would, when the Pharisees would talk about the Sadducees, they would use horrible terms to refer. They would refer to them as children of the devil, for crying out loud. And yet, as Christians, we look at it and go, oh, they're all the same. The Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Essenes and the Ebionites, all of them the same bunch. No, not so. They even looked at each other and went, you guys are from the devil is what you are.
We don't do that now, do we?
No, we never do that. No. Those UCC people, and those Lutheran people, and those fill in the blank. Yeah. Thank God many of us don't do that. I'm not even going to say most, but there are some of us who don't do that. They would, the children of the devil, like I said, get used, and that was actually a custom that got adopted by the early church as well, that they would refer to others as the, like for example, there was a guy named Marcion. He was known as they called him the first heretic. And actually, this guy Marcion did us a big favor. He started compiling a New Testament, and it was kind of twisted, some of it. He wound up twisting the words of Jesus to make it kind of sound anti-Semitic. He liked most of the writings of Paul, but, and so what that did was it made the church go, wait a minute, he's got this thing out there. We better start putting something together that's real. So kind of a backhanded compliment to Marcion, but I think it was... goodness, just lost it. It might have been Irenaeus who referred to Marcion as the firstborn of Satan. Now, Marcion would call himself a Christian. In fact, he would call himself the right Christian. And Irenaeus and others were like, nope, firstborn of the devil, that one. So even Christians wind up adopting that language kind of early on to refer to other Christians. And actually, what is this, number 5? Language like that refers to kind of the dualistic nature of apocalyptic literature. Remember, in apocalyptic literature, it's good versus evil, the Lord versus the devil, the followers of Christ versus the synagogue of Satan. That all plays into the same kind of language that's used to say there is a war going on. And remember, like I've told you, this isn't the first apocalyptic literature. In fact, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as we commonly call them, the Qumran scrolls, there was actually a scroll there that they refer to commonly as the War Scroll. But the whole title of this document was The War of the Children of Light and the Children of Darkness. And oh my goodness, it plays into exactly this kind of language, because it's not talking about demons and angels fighting with each other. It's talking about people who believe rightly versus people who believe not so rightly, what they would call wrongly. But again, that was their definition of right and wrong. You listen to the other side and they would say, no, we're the right. We're the children of light. They're the children of darkness. Just the way the language worked. So modern readers of passages like this are almost always Christian in number. Almost always it's in a culture where we outnumber the Jews a whole lot to one. The thing about it is that in Smyrna, for example, or let's take the whole Roman Empire. The whole Roman Empire, oh goodness, the Jewish population, I think, represented 3% of the whole Roman Empire. Just they were way outnumbered, a minority. But in the time of John's writing, in the year 95, the Jews outnumbered the Christians 30-1. We were a really tiny minority during that time. So, so we see ourselves borrowing that kind of language, and so some of the non-Christians, the non-Christian Jews, I should say, are kind of upset with some of the Christian Jews because we still go into the temple. We still go into the synagogue at that point. And a lot of times it was because the Romans had given a special protection to the Jews. And so when Jewish Christians would go, yeah, we're with them. We're with these guys. we're going into the temple or to the synagogue with them. The non-Christian Jews would go, you're not one of us. You don't belong in here. You don't get the special, but because you guys are against the emperor. And so the agitation starts all over again. It was kind of understandable for the non-Christian Jews to say, they're kind of just using us for their own protection. They want to say, if you want to be protected like us, then be one of us. I mean, really be like one of us. Well, again, I say it's understandable because many of the Jewish leaders were resentful for the synagogue being used that way, the way they suspected the Jewish Christians were using it. And apparently something just like that had happened here in the city of Smyrna. And so John refers to this synagogue who would do that as a synagogue of Satan. The seventh point of that is that a historical understanding of the New Testament helps us to understand texts like this, but it nowhere, in no way, no how, no time, gives us license to use the same kind of language. It's a different time. We're in a different scenario, a different culture of history. Later generations did use language like that during the Middle Ages, during the at Lateran Council IV in 1215, Pope Innocent III, there's a good name for you, Innocent. Yeah, and he wasn't the third one either. He said, not only did he at that council declare the doctrine of transubstantiation. All right, when the priest elevates the chalice, the wine physically becomes the blood of Christ. When he elevates the host, the bread physically becomes the flesh of Christ. That's 1215. That's as soon as that started. But he also launched a crusade against a group he deemed to be heretical called the Albigensians. Yeah, heresy. They thought that we should follow the New Testament. Okay, and they're the heretics. Got it. I think the Albigensians, the Waldensians, the Paulicians, all these groups who had similar, motivations and understandings of what worship should look like. But then he also said, and these Jews, you know what? We need to be able to discern between these Jews. And he made them wear distinctive garments. I'm not saying it was a yellow Star of David, but it was something like that. Because why? Because he reads the book of Revelation, he reads the Gospels as being anti-Jewish. And that's the farthest thing from it. And so we sometimes still will take that language and use it, which was historical, cultural, literary language, and we have no business laying claim to that kind of stuff at all. So anyway, we never have a justification for speaking of the Jews that way. On the contrary, we should be pretty saddened by the way the Bible has been misused like that, much in the same way that the Bible was misused to justify slavery. I mean, in the slave owners would, I don't want to say slave owners because you can't own a person. The slavers, we'll call them, they would actually read to the slaves from the Bible, justifying the position that they felt like they had. And they would read from the book of Philemon, the letter to Philemon, for example, and say, see, it's saying right here that slavery is okay. No, that's not what the book was talking about. It was incidental that this poor guy Epaphroditus was a slave, and so Paul is saying, treat him like a brother. Don't treat him like that. Well, anyways, so we should be really careful about that. Christ tells these persecuted people here in Smyrna to be faithful, to even the point of being ready to die for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of Christ. And that's not an exaggeration either. Opposition to the gospel was fierce in Smyrna. They were so vengeful, so angry that martyrdom was a distinct possibility. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous martyrs of the early church dies in Smyrna. His name was Polycarp. Gotta love that name. Sounds like mini fish. Polycarpos in Greek. Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna. In fact, he had been ordained bishop by none other than John himself, at least according to Irenaeus and Tertullian. And you got to trust those guys, especially Irenaeus. So he says, I mean, imagine. Okay, well, let me take just a second and talk about Polycarp, because I may never get to talk about him again. Polycarp, here's one of my favorite cats. He's arrested by the authorities. It's the year 156 when he will be put to death. And they arrest him in Smyrna. They're going to burn him at the stake. And according to all the legends of the time, and there was a famous book called the Martyrium of St. Polycarp. It's 22 chapters. It's worth reading. And Polycarp is there, and they're piling up the stakes. And Polycarp is like, "What are you going to burn with that? That ain't going to burn nobody. You better pile on." What? And so they pile on. Now, I don't know if Polycarp understood what death by burning at the stake was like, but the fact is that the more fire, the sooner the oxygen is sucked away, because you don't die from burning, you die from asphyxiation, because the flame eats up all the oxygen. You wind up passing out from asphyxiation, and then the fire just burns the rest of your body. One cool story about it, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but you just want to believe it, or at least smile about it, is that they were so angry at Polycarp because he did pass out and didn't scream from any flames, but yet kept taunting him the whole way, that a guard actually throws a javelin into him. Now, when you die, your blood separates into solids and water, right? Am I correct, Noel? How long that takes, I don't know. But must have been enough that the water or the fluid that gushed out of his side actually extinguished the flames. Now that's just good poetry right there. That's good stuff. And so here's Polycarp now, who is he fearless? He's sure acting like it. And I often think about, did Polycarp have this message in mind? When the Lord was saying through John, you're going to suffer, but it won't last forever. Don't worry. You'll get through it, and I'll be there waiting for you at the end of it. Kind of think that Polycarp was probably had that in mind his whole life. And it was John who consecrated him as bishop. Oh, you got to love that stuff. He says, to the faithful in Smyrna who do not recoil, to those who won't cave in against all this pressure, they're promised to be given the crown of life. That's cool. Crown. There's two Greek words that are translated as crown. One is diadema, which is the royal crown like a king or queen or emperor would wear. And the second is Stephanos, which is the laurel crown that Olympians wore. And it's that word that's used here in John. He's not talking about a royal crown. You will be given the crown of the victor, the one who has survived, the one who has finished the race, the one who has triumphed. That's the crown. It's a crown of triumph, of joy. That's the crown that you're going to get there. Not anything by birth, not anything by selection, because you overcame, you get to wear the laurel crown. And he says it's a crown of victory, and those who receive that crown, those martyrs, John says, will not suffer the second death. Oh, here's a good word, the second death. Well, what is the second death? Well, we know the first death. That's when you snuff it here on planet Earth. But what is the second death? Well, you read on in John, and he will talk more about the second death. The second death is what happens after the judgment, the final judgment. He's going to get more specific about what the second death is, and it's worth being here for, because it's not what we always expect it to be. he gets more specific about it and who will suffer it and who will go through it. And remember, it doesn't say that the victors, those who receive their crown, doesn't say they won't go through the second death. It says they will not be harmed by the second death. We all go through it, but some people aren't going to be harmed by it. So the only way to avoid it is to die as a martyr. Hard to find these days, but there are a few places you can still go. If you don't want to be harmed by the second death. I'm going to take my chances with the second death. So in Pergamum then, and this will be the last one that we do. How are we doing? Oh, okay. I lost it. Give me a second. Okay. Come on. There we go. And to the angel of the church in Pergamum. Remember, when he says to the angel, he's talking about, remember, there's this dual aspect of what goes on earth, goes on in heaven. And so there is a prophet or pastor or proclaimer of the church, of the truth here on earth in the church, but there's also an angelic counterpart there, which he refers to as the stars, right? So he's saying to the pastor in the church in Pergamum, right? And sometimes, sorry, I don't mean to keep giving little nothing tidbits, but sometimes you'll see it referred to not as Pergamum, but Pergamon. It's the same place. And to the angel of the church in Pergamum, write, these are the words of him who has the two-edged sword. Remember again I said I was going to read it all through. I can't stop myself. In the first vision, when it talks about a double-edged sword proceeded from the mouth of God. Noel's making faces at me. It's referring back again to that original vision there. He says, I know where you are living, where Satan's throne is. Yet you are holding fast to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me. Even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan lives. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel, so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. So you also have some who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Again, repent then. If not, I will come to you soon and make war against them with the sword of my mouth. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. To everyone who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. And I will give a white stone. And on the white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. Oh, there's a lot to unpack in that one. This is good stuff. Okay, Pergamum, again, another city of about 100,000. And it's about 70 miles northwest of Smyrna. There was also temples of Rome and of the emperor there, and there was a huge altar dedicated to Zeus, the Greek king of the gods. The Romans called him Jupiter. In fact, the Romans referred to him as Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jewish, the highest and greatest. The city was also known for its great library that was said to have equaled the Library of Alexandria that got burned sometime later. And in fact, we get the word parchment actually from the word Pergamum. So yeah, it was that kind of a massive library there. It was on this altar of Zeus where animal sacrifices actually took place 24 hours a day. They were constantly sacrificing animals, and not only the bloodletting, but then the burning that took place on the altar. So that there was kind of like a platooning of priests who would come through with however long their shifts were, and, you know, wearing the hard hat and punching to the time clock, and, you know, what are you going to do, Phil? 47 doves I got to kill. Well, So these poor priests are just clocking in and out, and there is smoke over the city of Pergamum day in and day out. The reek of the burning of these sacrifices just always hung over the city of Pergamum there. Not only is it the temple of Zeus, but we also have another temple there, the temple of Asclepius. Now, Asclepius, here's a cat who is supposed to be the god of healing and is represented by snakes. Not just represented, they got snakes. Snakes, all God's children got snakes in the city of Pergamum. And they would actually bring the sick to the temple of Asclepius and leave them there where the snakes could come and crawl over them and heal them, they would say. And there ain't no healing going on. Well, unless I was lame. Then all of a sudden, like, all of a sudden, the leg feels good. I'm out of here. This snake crawl. Now, the snakes of Asclepius, the god of healing, we wind up seeing that wrapped around a certain rod that's used by the medical industry. It was called the caduceus. And these are the snakes of Asclepius. Sounds like a country song. The Snakes of Asclepius. Or maybe something else. So here in, you've got these who are sick, who are brought here to Asclepius, to the snake temple, the burning of the sacrifices at the temple of Zeus going on. Pergamum's a tough place to be a Christian. I mean, first off, you're constantly reminded by the smell and do the snakes stay in the temple, or do you find them, in your bath at night? I don't know. Tough to be a Christian there. These are the Rodney Dangerfield Christians here. They get no respect in the city of Pergamum. Now, there had been real persecution, again, taking place here, and apparently even a believer named Antipas was put to death. My faithful one, the Lord says about him. So, had he been put to death in order to shut him up? Had he been put to death as a discouragement for those who want to be a Christian? Oh, you want to be a Christian? Well, look what happened to this guy. Well, don't know what the motivation. And so, in fact, the sad thing is we really don't know a whole lot at all about who Antipas was. We don't find anything from the early church historians like Eusebius or Nicephorus or Sozomen or any of those guys, and even Irenaeus doesn't really mention him. I would like to know this guy, but he died for the sake of, and the Lord called him my faithful one. That's got to mean something. And so it must have been some comfort to the church there in Pergamum to know that the Lord understood the sufferings that they were going through. They knew, the Lord knew what they were experiencing. And it even reminds me of in the book of Exodus, in chapter 2, verse, I think the last verse of chapter 2, it talks about the Lord looked down on the, how's NRSV looks at it? The New Revised Standard Version says, God looked down on the Israelites and took notice of them. Nice. But in the Hebrew, it's actually a little more eloquent than that. And it says, and God looked on the children of Israel, and God knew. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Just that whole, and God knew. It encompasses everything. I know your affliction. I know your faithfulness. I know everything you're going through. So, using that same kind of Hebrew Bible imagery, the Lord says to them, I know. I don't know if there's anything more comforting than for somebody to say to you in your worst times, I know, I understand. It's not that somebody experiences what I have. It's not that they know from their own, that they've been through the same thing. But just to say, I know what heartache is. I know what you're going through. There's something about the camaraderie of suffering that there's a comfort to us. Anyway, So verse 12 then says that these are the words of him who has the two-edged sword, the words of Christ, dividing the holy from the unholy, the genuine from the false. Verse 13, I know where you're living, where Satan's throne is. Oh, goodness. Of course, that's referring to the throne of the emperors that's there, also referring to the temples of Zeus and Asclepius that are there. I know, this is Satan's throne where you are there in Pergamum. But then he goes on to say, yet you were holding fast to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan lives. It repeats that again. The throne of Satan, where Satan lives. Yeah, Pergamum's a tough town. In fact, and Antipas, I forgot to say, is really the only martyr called by name in the book of Revelation. The only name called there as one who has suffered the ultimate sacrifice. But then verse 14, but I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. Verse 15. So you also have some who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Oh, the Nicolaitans again. All right, they keep showing up. It's clear that the church needs help against enemies, both foreign and domestic. Those on the outside who are enemies and those who are on the inside who are also proving to be faithless and to be false. The Nicolaitans have slipped into the church in Pergamum just like they had at Ephesus. And the teachings of Balaam and the Nicolaitans had, obviously they were promoting this assimilation with the culture, the pagan culture around them, participating in pagan festivals, eating the food that had been sacrificed had been ritually slaughtered to the pagan gods in the pagan temples. And while some of the New Testament writers don't really think it's a big deal, Paul, eat what's set before you and say nothing. For John, it's like, no, this is an indicator. This is a symbol of something else. It means that you're willing to assimilate here with these. And in John's language, he says that such Christian teachers who promote the eating of such sacrificial meat are practicing spiritual adultery, he says. They are failing to remain faithful to the Lord. Now, while we don't know exactly what were the rules of each of the churches there in Asia, it becomes clear that some of them were adapting their Christian life to their non-Christian environment in attitudes and in ways that were kind of permissive. And so the Lord's telling them to repent from that permissiveness or face punishment. And what's that punishment? Well, he says that he will make war against them with the sword of his mouth. Really just meaning that the word of the Lord is going to divide the right from the wrong, the true from the false. I'm not talking about anybody getting killed or anything like that. We read sword and we think, oh, you're going to die for it. We always want somebody to die for something or other. No, it just means that you'll be proven to be false. The Lord will make war with the sword of his own mouth, the sword of his word. And then verse 17 includes, the falsehood will be cleaved away by the sharp sword of the Lord. Verse 17 includes one of those really remarkable phrases. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the church is saying to the churches, to the Spirit is saying it to the churches. To everyone who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give a white stone. And on that white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. Oh boy, that looks pretty confusing. What in the world? It's not confusing at all. John is once again using the Hebrew Bible and the experience of the people of Israel to explain what's happening here. Okay, let's go back to Exodus one more time. I do love this verse. This one is, I'm not going to say my favorite because I say that every week about every verse. But this is one of my favorites. Okay, we know that manna is the so-called bread of heaven. I might have told you this. I'm sure I've told you this at some point. Manna is actually kind of a joke, kind of a question. It's a question. It's what the people of Israel said when they went out and picked it up. What's this? That's what the name manna means. What is this? So go out and get your daily rations of what's this. And I mean, that's just, don't tell me they didn't have a sense of humor back in those days. So in the morning you get the what's this, in the evening you get the quail. The other way around? No, that's the way it went. Evening you got the quail. And yeah, so now what about manna? We're told that it was, I think the book of Exodus says that it had the color of hoarfrost. You know, I mean, really, really white. In other Jewish writings, it refers to it as having the color of beryl, B-E-R-Y-L, right? The stone having the color of beryl. And that stone is one of the stones mentioned in the Garden of Eden. It's one of those stones that's mentioned in the 12 gates in the city of New Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, in Revelation. Beryl comes and goes a couple of times in Scripture. We see it in the Garden of Eden. We see it wandering in the wilderness, the manna that looks like beryl. And then we see it here, the hidden manna. John is drawing a connection between the beryl that was in the Garden of Eden and the manna, which looks like beryl, which is kind of a down payment. It's kind of God giving a down payment to the believers that there will be restoration. There will be a return to Eden. And here, just as a reminder, here's what's this. Here's the bread from heaven that looks like beryl. And then he goes on to say here in Revelation, and I will put a white stone, beryl, I will put a white stone in his hand. Beryl and white stones were really, really, really popular for people during the ancient world, because apparently it could be written on or carved in, and they would make necklaces and amulets out of it. Sometimes they would put the names of a deity on there, but sometimes the names of a loved one too. And so he's saying, I'll give you the secret manna, that down payment that was given to you in wandering in the wilderness, and I will give you this stone, and there's going to be a new name there, and only the one who receives it will know what that name is. That's just cool imagery there. He's saying what's going to happen is that at the end of all things, paradise is restored. John Milton, famous poet, wrote the poem of Paradise Lost, and we always forget the second poem called Paradise Regained. And he says that it was Christ who did the work of regaining paradise for us and opening paradise to us and letting us eat from the tree of life one more time. Or not just one more time, but again and again. That paradise comes back to us, and here are the symbols of it.
Beautiful.
Can I get a few more minutes and we can do Thyatira? Or Thyatira, depending on how you say it. Okay, Thyatira was another city of commerce and industry. It's about 45 miles southeast of Pergamum. A lot of traders and artisans, craftspeople who were there. A lot of trade guilds that were there. Kind of think of a trade guild like a labor union. Um, like the church in Ephesus, the church there at Thyatira, they were commended for their love and for their patient endurance. That's a phrase that gets played over and over again too, patient endurance, as well as their faith. And here, when he says faith, he's not talking about the faith being like doctrine, but more their faithfulness. They're commended for being faithful. Now, these guilds in Thyatira were, like I said, looked a lot like modern, labor unions now, but they had certain religious aspects to them as well. They would meet in pagan temples. Animals were offered in sacrifice to the gods, and then the burnt animals wind up being eaten, as supper for these guilds, the members of these guilds. And that made it pretty difficult for Christians who are wanting to maintain this separateness, wanting to not eat food sacrificed to idols. But yet, if you don't, you can't make a living. What are you going to do? If they did participate, then they felt like they must have been being unfaithful to the Lord. Again, Thyatira is another tough place to be a Christian, especially if you're wanting to conduct any kind of commerce whatsoever. So the opening of the message, I didn't read it, did I?
Yeah, no, that's not.
He says, and to the angel of the church in Thyatira write, these are the words of the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire, whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your works, your love, faith, service, and patient endurance. I know that your last works are greater than the first. But I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet and is teaching and beguiling my servants to practice fornication and eat food sacrificed to idols. I gave her time to repent, but she refuses to repent of her fornication. Beware, I am throwing her on a bed, and those who commit adultery with her I am throwing into great distress, unless they repent of her doings. And I will strike her children dead. And all the churches will know that I am the one who searches minds and hearts, and I will give to each of you as your works deserve. But to the rest of you in Thyatira who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden. Only hold fast to what you have until I come. To everyone who conquers and continues to do my works to the end, I will give authority over the nations to rule them with an iron rod, as when clay pots are shattered. Even as I also received authority from my Father, to the one who conquers, I will give the morning star. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Wow. Iron rods, clay pots, morning stars. Goodness. And Jezebel. Well, now it's a party. You got Jezebel, and I mean, there's a name that is, you never see a kid named Jezebel anymore. Just like in the South, you never saw a kid named Sherman. There's just some names that are not going to be. When was the last Judas ever seen? Well, that was about the year 33, I guess. Jezebel. Okay, is this the same Jezebel that we see in 1 Kings chapter 18 and 19? No. But that woman is the symbol of this one. Is this person he's talking about really named Jezebel? No, nobody named their kid Jezebel after that. I mean, I remember anytime my aunt wore especially gaudy earrings, my mother would call her a Jezebel. It became a symbolic name. Yeah. Anyway, he says, so in the opening paragraphs there, he's going back to some of the Daniel imagery. Remember, in the vision of Christ in chapter 1, he talks about he had feet like burnished bronze as though refined in a fire. Remember the three Hebrews thrown into the fiery furnace of Nebuchadnezzar, and it says that there one like the Son of Man walked among them. So it's kind of a throwback to that imagery. This is the same one who was with those Hebrews then in the fire. He's with you now. Then in verse 19, he says, I know your works, your love, faith, service, and here again, patient endurance. I know that your last works are greater than the first. That's a good phrase. But once again, patient endurance. And then to hear that their later works are even greater than the first works, that's got to be some encouragement. It means we're improving. We're doing better. We must be maturing in the Lord somehow. That's got to be really consoling to them. We've had advancement in our spiritual life. Again, in contrast to the church in Ephesus, where you ain't as good as you used to be. You don't love like you used to. The church here, everything's looking good, except you got this Jezebel woman. There's something wrong here. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet and is teaching and beguiling my servants to practice fornication and to eat food sacrificed to idols. I gave her time to repent, but she refuses. And he goes on to say, beware, I am throwing her on a bed, and those who commit adultery with her I am throwing into great distress, unless they repent of their doings, and I will strike her children dead. Wow, that is some of the most harrowing imagery of all. This Jezebel woman thrown onto a bed. It's language that's very uncomfortable for us, but it should be. We're not supposed to be getting warm and fuzzies from this. We're supposed to be seeing this. This is what it looks like. So we're forced to remember the 1 Kings 18 and 19 story about Jezebel. Okay, that Jezebel, she was a princess from, where was she from? Tyre. And she had been married to the prince, the heir apparent, Ahab. And so now, when she becomes queen, she had been the princess of this metropolitan city. And now she becomes queen over these, what she considers country bumpkins. And she thinks that the Yahweh worship is that's just country folk doing that stuff. Us who worship Baal Melkart, which was her cult, Baal Melkart is basically the Lord of the Dead. This was a gruesome cult. She thinks they're the classy ones, and so she keeps trying to introduce this into the court of the North Kingdom in Israel. By this time, remember, the North Kingdom and South Kingdom had divided. The South Kingdom is Judah. The North Kingdom is called the Kingdom of Israel, and their capital was in Samaria. So Ahab and Jezebel are in Samaria, and the prophets tell them there's trouble coming, and you guys are, we don't listen to these country prophets. We're slick people. We're sophisticated. And that is apparently the same attitude that this person who calls herself a prophet, apparently nobody else does, she calls herself a prophet, and he goes, here's what happened to Jezebel from 1 Kings. She winds up being thrown from the balcony, thrown to the cobblestones below. And the dogs came and lapped up her blood. Using almost identical language, John says she will be thrown onto a bed. And those who come to her, who participate in her, what do I say, heresy or idolatry, or fill in any word you want there, they also will be thrown into distress. The word thrown or throw is pretty vivid. Just like happened to her, that's what's going to happen to this Jezebel. Spiritually, she's not going to be thrown from a balcony. She's not really going to be thrown onto a bed. That's not. But spiritually, this is what's going to take place among them. Thrown involuntarily where she did not want to go, and her children, like Jezebel before her children would be put to death. Again, was this woman in Thyatira named Jezebel? No. But she has served as a modern day Jezebel and is acquainted and comfortable with these cultic practices. But, he says, for those who have rejected this Jezebel and her teachings, which John calls the deep things of Satan, nothing more is required of you. You guys have done okay. Just hang in there. Hold fast until everything is brought to pass. But that phrase, the deep things of Satan, that's a little bit of a, I'm going to say sarcasm. And we always want to think that New Testament writers were never sarcastic, that Jesus was never sarcastic, Paul was never sarcastic. Paul was the king of sarcasm. I mean, when he says in there, he talks about the people with the circumcision. Yeah, they want to have you circumcised. I wish they'd just cut the whole thing off. Wow-wee. Okay. I don't have to explain what that means to you. Tell me Paul's not sarcastic. Well, some people have said that sarcasm is a sad substitute for wit. I don't know. Some of these New Testament writers use it very wittily. So, the deep things of Satan. What is he talking about? It refers to the pseudo-profound teachings and philosophies among these false teachers, that they think that they're being deep. They think that they're being profound. And he goes, there's nothing profound about these deep things of Satan. The Jezebel of the Hebrew Bible believed that she was profound and deep and cosmopolitan and all that stuff. But no, but John is also using a contrast between the deep things of Satan with the deep things of God that will be mentioned elsewhere and had been used elsewhere. And then John's usual phrase, everyone who conquers, also has a little bit of addition added on there when he says that everyone who conquers and continues to do my works to the end. My works, he says, is in contrast to her doings, talking about Jezebel. My works, her doings. And again, the end, to say to the end, is just a reference to that patient endurance that John encourages over and over again. But he offers them two rewards to the overcomers. They will, one, share in Christ's rule over the nations, and Christ will give them the morning star. And I like that. Now, it's not to be taken literally, of course, that Christ is going to give them the planet Venus. No. Or some other star that may substitute. No, it's not that at all. It's a metaphor, on the one hand, for announcing a new day. For those who overcome, they will witness a new day. A new morning star will rise to herald a new dawn. A new day of hope and fulfillment and joy, following what St. John of the Cross called the long night of the soul. What followed the long night of expectation and anguish. But even more than that, as wonderful as that is, when John says, I will give them the morning star, we have to go way to the end of the book and we find out what the morning star really is. It's Christ himself. He calls himself the morning star. And so he says, to those who overcome, I will give you myself. Man, oh man. More than a new day, which is wonderful. Christ is going to give himself to the overcomer. The last, best reward for any Christian is to be with the Lord. I think we did it. 21. Well, any questions? Yeah, I should have stopped along the way and asked for questions. You know me. And he wouldn't hear of it anyway. Don't ask questions. Chuck.
So the Jezebel is a real person and not a certain sect or a certain religious organization?
No.
I was wondering about that too.
Yeah, when apparently there was really a woman who goes to and I'm thinking about Bruce Metzger's book. I think he talks about it there, and another guy, Bart Ehrman. And they said apparently there was really a woman who had made her way into that church and was teaching these false things. And so there wasn't a cult of Jezebel, so to speak, because no Jew or no Christian is going to follow that. They've got a bad taste in their mouth from they all kind of like, oh, we know what happened to you, thrown to the dogs and this is John referring to one woman who calls herself a prophet. It was a little too individual and specific.
So it's kind of like the Nicolaitans, only they don't use her name because it's more powerful to use the image of Jezebel.
Yes.
Is that,
I mean, if her name was Betty Lou, kind of loses some of its,
Betty Lou the Edge. Yeah.
So, we know that woman Betty Lou. Sounds like a country singer to me. How frightening is that? But Jezebel, that'll make you sit up and take notice. I mean, if we were to refer to somebody, some fifth grader in school, well, that little Adolf, it just attaches a name to. I mean, goodness gracious. Once again, there's a name lost to history. Although, who is it? Harpo Marx. That was his real name, was Adolf Marx. Of course, he was born back in, 1898 or something like that, I think. Better to take on Harpo. Much better.
I'm just pondering the wonderful literariness of it, right? Of like what image is chosen for the image of Christ that relates to that particular issues in that city, right? That's like for the first one with the 7 stars in the right hand. This back to like creation. What's the core of things? Return to love.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I know it. We could spend a week on every one of those and still come up missing. When Nicole came home today, she goes, "You still working on that?" I said, "I'm trying to cut out stuff." It's not, can I fill up an hour and a half? It's, what can I pack into an hour and a half? So she was like, "Is it really important stuff that you're leaving out?" Everything is important. But we'll do what we can, and because I don't want to keep you guys here until the turn of the next millennium. So, I know. It's just, which is why it always annoys me or perplexes me, it's annoying. When people take this beautiful imagery and they make it so scary and just cut it out. This isn't an Alfred Hitchcock film. This is a revelation of Jesus Christ. I mean, and that's got to be good news. And even the things like, "I will bring a sword," not talking about chopping anybody up, talking about cleaving away falsehood from truth, talking about those who understand they're gonna get it, and those who being thrown on a bed, and those who go with her, they're going to be thrown into distress. Yeah, all right. Well, settle down, John. But of course, John would go, "Wasn't me. That was the Lord." So,